Alright guys, welcome back to another video, and today we're here to do an exciting video. We're going to be comparing 3 different digital board game tablets or devices that have, or you know, game consoles, whatever you want to call these things. And there's a lot of interesting stuff right now that I wanted to get into on these devices and how they're actually doing things. And some of these devices do things very differently, and they're catering after different markets. You've got the Infinity Game Table that's more mass market, going after, you know, people who get their board games at Target and stuff like that. You know, those marquee board games that everyone knows, like Monopoly and Tapple and all that kind of stuff, and Risk. And then you have the Last GameBoard that's doing things very differently, going after the hardcore board gamers with the board games that us board gamers really know. So there's a lot of different variances. These fit different people. A lot of different features depending on which one you actually want in your household. And we're going to be comparing the 32-inch version, the 18.5-inch version of both the Arcade1up Infinity Game Table and the Infinity Game Board that they just came out with in the smaller size against the Last GameBoard. And we're going to see what I think about these 3 devices and whom they may be for. So let's go ahead and get into the video.
Gaming tech, eating brekkie is the gaming tech. Going for a brekkie is the gaming tech. Gaming tech is the gaming tech. Gaming techie.
Alright guys, so here we are with the Last GameBoard here. What I wanted to start off talking about is the form factor of these devices here. And you're looking again at the Last GameBoard here. And you can see this is a really sleek looking device. Obviously you can see it's a square shape, so it kind of takes fold, and a lot of board games out there are square boards, so it kind of mimics that size here. It has a 22-inch surface to be able to play on if you go all the way around the board, so it's a pretty decent size for what you're looking for. And I've never actually used it and had any issues with actually using it and saying it's too small or anything. The games that are on here obviously proportionally work really well because it's a square board. You know, it kind of takes up the whole entire square board because it's not like in a 16:9 aspect ratio, because obviously we know a lot of board games are a square board. So like I said, it matches the aesthetic kind of perfectly in that. And it also has an internal battery built in, so it lasts about somewhere around 2 hours or so, depending on the game that you're actually playing. Which is good, so you can use that for 2 hours, and you know, or you can use it plugged in. You have both different options. You use it plugged in while it's charging, like you guys see there, or use it on battery, whichever way you want. This thing also has an HDMI out. This is a USB-C charger, and then there's a HDMI out that you can actually use to maybe plug this into a PC, to a capture card, and capture some gameplay or something like that, which is pretty cool that you can do that. So it's nice that that's an option. And it also has an SD card slot as well on the side of it. This one, of course, is really portable and really easy to take, you know, around to your family and friend's house, which is exactly how I use it because of the nature of obviously how easy it is to just carry around, and you know, the lightweight and all that kind of stuff. It's really easy to just kind of pick it up and carry and go anywhere you want to a friend's house. Now here is my Arcade1up Infinity Game Table, a really similar device. Obviously, it's a table to play board games on. They're going after different markets and stuff like that, like we talked about, but there's still some interesting stuff here to talk about if you're looking at it as like, which one should I get for me and all that kind of stuff, which is why we're doing this comparison. This 32-inch version is obviously larger than the one upstairs. However, you got to remember that this one is a 16:9 screen. So while some games do take up the full screen because it's using it, a lot of board games like Monopoly will actually, and you'll see that here in some of the gameplay in a little bit, obviously are going to be a square board. So there's going to be some leftover space on the left and right that actually aren't being used. So even though it is much bigger, and it still is bigger overall, just know that, you know, it's not as big as a 32-inch when you're talking about a square board game. However, some of their other games that you play that are not necessarily board games, because they do a lot of that on here, like fling hockey and, you know, dominoes and stuff like that, are obviously on a large 32-inch, and that kind of changes things at that point, where that wouldn't matter at that point. And, you know, that obviously does take up the full screen. And then here, this is cool because this one has legs. So you can see here that this one does have full-on legs, so you can actually stand it up. I have it in front of my couch, as you guys can see here. So this one is a little bit easier to you know, play with people because, you know, you just pull up a chair around it. It's its own table. It's its own little coffee thing. So you can kind of just have 4 chairs around it, and people can just be playing from each corner. So it kind of gathers around really easily in that regard. This also has a power cord that you can plug in to use it powered on, like I am right now. It does not come with an internal battery, but they do sell an internal battery, usually around $140 or something like that, that you can add on to the 32-inch version here, and then it can be battery powered, and it lasts about 4 to 5 hours with that battery pack if you actually use that thing, which is pretty nice. And then you can have that, you know, going on for 4 hours, so it's pretty nice to have both options there as well, even though it is an additional accessory on here instead of, you know, coming all kind of bundled in. However, there is a slot on it right here on the back for the battery to go in, so it looks like it's built in all together, even though it's sold additionally and separately. Of course, I'm not going to lie, the 32-inch version, when you see games that are really well designed on it, is obviously just awesome, because the bigger the better. That's usually what the theory is. And again, that is kind of what I follow on here as well, except for the fact that this is a 32-inch widescreen, and a lot of the board games don't take up the full real estate in that scenario. When it comes to the specs of these devices, this one here, the Arcade1up version, this is using Android underneath. Of course, they're using their own OS, the exact same thing that the last GameBoard that I showed you before is doing the same thing. It's Android OS at the bottom, and they have their own overlay and stuff like that over top of it, and using their own custom OS. The same thing that both guys are doing. Of course, their OSs are done differently, which we'll talk about in a minute. But as far as the specs inside and stuff like that, besides the screen, they both have, of course, internal speakers. The speakers on here, this one has some rumble effect, which is pretty cool. So when you're playing games like Battleship and stuff like that, will actually rumble the table, which the other one does not. So it does have some cool features like that where it rumbles for certain games. But the specs inside are definitely higher quality on the last GameBoard. The actual chip, graphics chip and stuff like that is a lot more capable on the last GameBoard than the Infinity Game Table. The touchscreen on the last GameBoard is also much better suited on the last GameBoard than this one. Like here, you can tell even when you're scrolling around here, it's not perfectly smooth on the 32-inch as you guys are looking at here. It's not bad by any means, but you can tell it's not as smooth when you're scrolling through here, and the touchscreen is not as precise on the 32-inch Infinity Game Table as it would be on the last GameBoard. When you're looking at the last GameBoard here, the touchscreen is just much more responsive, and it's just a lot more smooth. Again, it's just better specs inside. They're using a higher graphics quality chip in there. Same thing with just the processor and stuff. So it's kind of expected, but you know, like I said, the OS definitely feels much snappier and all that kind of stuff than it would be on the 32-inch Infinity Game Table. Now, I will throw this one into the mix as well. This is the actually new 18.5-inch version that I just did a video on. It's the exact same thing as the 32-inch Infinity Game Table, but now in a much more compact size, and I wanted to just talk about it real quick so you guys know that this actually exists as well. It is obviously a much smaller screen, as you guys are looking at here, than the 32-inch version. However, even though this is an 18.5-inch version, it goes back to what I was talking about before, that it lends itself to still being smaller than that, because again, when you have games like Monopoly or something that's square, where some of these board games are square, and not all of them are, some of them are taking up the full screen, so it's fantastic, but the ones that are square like Monopoly will have the bars not being used on the side, where it has just artwork and stuff like that, so then the screen's not as big as 18.5, which is why the last GameBoard sometimes still feels bigger than this, even though they're really similar in size, but this being 16 by 9 kind of changes that when you're playing square board games. And this one also doesn't have like a built-in battery or anything. You could use the other battery and kind of plug it in at the bottom. There's no slot for it or anything, but you could use that big battery from the 32-inch if you bought that. With this smaller version here, this is a lot more compact, and the touchscreen is better on here than that 32-inch version. The screen that they're using is obviously, it must just have better touchscreen responsiveness when you're moving around. I mean, the OS is still kind of similar, where it's still like not perfectly smooth, but I don't think it's bad by any stretch. I never had an issue when you're playing board games and stuff. It's never been an issue playing hardly anything, but I do think that this 18.5-inch version is definitely more touch responsive, and I've done a video on that kind of showcasing both of them off, where if you're playing games that they have on here like air hockey and stuff like that, it's definitely a better way to play it on here, because the touchscreen actually follows your finger much better. Not perfect, but much better, and you guys will see that if you watch my other video, comparing back and forth, than that 32-inch version does downstairs. So of course, overall, the portability factor definitely goes to the last GameBoard, because it's a lot easier to carry around. Has a good form factor at the square board games, since a lot of games are square and stuff like that. It lends itself really well, and it's not that 16.9 aspect ratio. However, smaller inch version that we just talked about obviously is very portable, very easy to carry around, and still has a lot of fun to be had with it, and the touchscreen's even more responsive than that 32-inch version downstairs, even if it's not as responsive as the last GameBoard one is. And there's a lot of cool different games on here that families may recognize and stuff like that. So but the 32-inch is obviously the least portable, because even though it has a built-in battery has a battery that you can purchase on the side, that thing is way too heavy. Even if you just take the legs off, which you can take the legs off and just carry the top, which is what I did to my family's house, and I took the legs off and just left it home. It's definitely a pain to carry that thing around. It just weighs way too much. So this one here is definitely a good medium ground, but again, it feels a lot smaller than the last GameBoard because of the aspect ratio when you're playing certain games, not all of them. Now I want to talk about the game library on here as well. So we're going to talk about game library on both of these because they're very different from one another. So here on the Last GameBoard, what I would say about the game library is the game library, in my opinion, and this is no disrespect to anybody at Arcade1up, but they're just designed differently. But I feel like the quality of the games on here are much higher represented. And you guys will see some examples here in a minute. But, you know, just this is the library of the Last GameBoard currently. So it's definitely much smaller than what's on the last game, or sorry, what's on the Infinity Game Table. The Infinity Game Table is sitting at like 109 games right now, and they release a couple, usually 1 or 2 a month, but sometimes they're not all board games because they're going after a wider market. So the Last Game Board is geared towards board gamers. They're releasing games that board gamers love and stuff like that, and that's kind of what their concentration is. Whereas on the Infinity Game Table, they're going after that wide demographic. They're going after people who know Hasbro games, who's played things like Candyland and the families and households and stuff like that, like Monopoly and the big titles from Hasbro, and just, you know, more simple games that you may play on that thing, like I said before, air hockey and pool and stuff like that. They're going after a wider demographic. They do have some marquee board games on there, like Ticket to Ride and Pandemic and stuff like that, but that's not their target demographic. I hope that they keep releasing more board games on that platform because that's where I think the Arcade1up thing shines, and that's what I've always said. But again, they're going after a wider demographic, and they don't always release just straight up board games on that thing. Sometimes they're completely different things. Here on the Last GameBoard, here on the library, you can see it's all about the board games, and it's all about going after the hardcore board game market instead. So you have things like Anagramma, which is a, you know, kind of like Scrabble. You have Cat Lady, a really popular board game. Chess, we all know what that is. Code Break, very similar to like Code Names. You got the Color Scheme, really popular game. Creature Feature, depicted as an internal built game. That's like a Pictionary kind of game. Downforce, really great game and popular. You got things like Koi, Mystic Veil, fantastic. Night of the Ninja, really fun. One Card Wonder they just released. They do have a pool version on here, as you can see. Railroad Ink Challenge, Shooty Tanks, Stop Thief, Terraforming Mars, Texas Hold'em, you know, stuff like that. Viticulture, Zombie Dice, and Wings of Glory. So they have a lot less games. However, they are touting, and we don't know because we don't know what the future holds, but they are touting that they're going to have over 100 games by the end of this year. They got a long way to go to reach that mark, but I'm excited if they do hit that mark. If their third party and their internal developers, you know, get to that mark, that'd be fantastic. But what is here right now is really, really solid. And here's some examples on some of the games on here. I'll show you a couple of these games running just so you can get an idea of the quality level of these games, in my opinion. So we'll start off with something like Cat Lady. You can see the interface here is really nice. It gives you like a screen preview of, you know, what the games look like and all that stuff. But if we hit play here, you can kind of see what I'm talking about here in a minute on how these games are designed and just how well they are designed. So here, for example, when I hit play here and I hit Classic on here, I can go ahead and just hit one of these and just log into this one, and let's say I add a couple of AI because this game supports AI. Let's just do all 4 players so you guys can see how it works on here on the board. Again, it being a square board game just matches perfectly for some of these games because it's perfectly square, so you get to, you know, use the full real estate here. So here's the game Cat Lady. If you guys do not know Cat Lady, it's a really, really popular card game in the board game community. You can see it's just really well designed. It has a fantastic look to it. It runs extremely smooth, no lag or anything like that. You can see the computer is playing their turn. This is mine right here. I can look at my cats, feed them if I want to. If I had, you know, chicken to grab here, I can grab this. There are just, all the games are just designed really well. So that's, you know, an idea of what Cat Lady looks like. Let's move to another one. So here, for example, is Mystic Veil. Mystic Veil is fantastic. Again, this is another game that supports AI. So I'm playing down here, and these 3 are, of course, AI. But, of course, these can be players around the table when you're playing. But I think this game also has a fantastic look to it. And when it comes to my turn here, when the cards flip around, you can see it flips towards me. And just look at these cards when you look at them. I mean, look at the animations on the cards and how you can actually see the rain pouring down there, if you guys can see that. Just how good that looks and how the animations look. Same thing if I click on these flowers here, you can see that they're moving and stuff like that. The animations are just fantastic. You know, you can see all your cards on here that you're scrolling through if you need to scroll through them. Everything works really well. Everything's just labeled really well. And again, it's just a fantastic looking game. And they did a really good job with it, and especially with the cards just making them feel lifelike just by when you're clicking on them, just looking at, you know, the rainstorm there and stuff like that. All the cards kind of come to life. Now here is another game as an example here, my last one I'll give you guys on the Last GameBoard, and this is Stop Thief. A game that's never been in digital form that was created by them, and I think this game is fantastic and looks super good. The lighting effects over here in the subway, how the lights are flickering, and when you enter different rooms, the light turn on. You got the car effects there. When you get a clue, you got all of these lights going on here with the person that you're trying to arrest. You can see what quadrant they're going in, and then it's your turn to move and stuff like that. All of that stuff. And like I said, the game just looks really, really good. And then, of course, you can select your card here, kind of move around, select your piece, and kind of move around the board. So all these games, in my opinion, are just designed super, super well on here. That just lends it to feeling really high quality. But what I will say is not necessarily an issue, but what makes this interesting is that because these games are a lot more involved, I'm gonna say, even though there's a few involved games on the Infinity Game Table as well, like Monopoly has a lot going on for it, like some of these games do. But these games are, first of all, some of these are being created from scratch. Sometimes they're not ports all the time. So like the one I just showed you. So what that leads into is that there could be a lot more bugs in these games. So the good thing is that the team over at the Last GameBoard listens to feedback and they fix most of these bugs really, really fast. The ones that I've showcased so far, are, from my knowledge anyway, are mostly bug-free. So there's sometimes where something comes up and then they have to fix it, and obviously that's apparent when you're creating games from scratch. But like Cat Lady has been really, really smooth. Creature Feature so far has been really smooth. Downforth has been great. Haven't had any issues with that one. Code Break has run well. Then in the Ninja has run well. Mystic Veil has run well. One Card Wonder is the latest one that came out, so there's a couple bugs they need to fix on that one, but they're working on it, and they've released 2 updates, even though that game just came out last week, so they're definitely on top of it. Stop Thief plays mostly well, but I did find a couple of issues after my 4th playthrough last week. So look at that, 3 playthroughs, no bugs, and then the 4th one I did find something, so I let them know that yesterday. So there's obviously sometimes you're going to run into a couple of bugs because these games are a lot more things going on in these games than your basic games that sometimes the Infinity Game Table is releasing. Going over here to give you guys some examples. This is the Infinity Game Table, and this is their library. So over here, these are all the different games I own. Of course, they do have a game store tab up there on top to see all the games that are there. But you got the idea. These are all their games. So they have things like Candyland, Carom, Checkers, Chess, Chutes and Ladders, a bunch of arcade games. They have Clue, Connect 4, Guess Who, The Game of Life, Forzy, which is fantastic, Fling Hockey, Dominoes, Hues and Clues, great game, Hungry Hippos, things like Monopoly and Batman Monopoly. Oh No, really fun game. Pandemic, great. Pixel Push Football, fantastic. They came out with Risk, which is really good. So they have a lot of good games on their table as well. Scrabble, Rummy, Sorry, Simon, Space Tennis, Spade. So they have a good variety of games as well. They got Ticket to Ride down there as well. They got Tapple, which is a really big game that a lot of people play at Target. So they do have some really good marquee games on here. The problem is that I told you that they have over 100 games on here, which is true. But again, they go to the more family-oriented type of games, at least right now. Like it's not always dedicated to board gamers. Like the last few releases that they've had have been really like arcade quality stuff and not like a game-breaking board game that we're all waiting for. We want the next Ticket to Ride. We want the next Risk. We want the next Pandemic or whatever the game is going to be. We want it on this table. We know they have a partnership with Asmodee. They have a gigantic catalog of games. Where's Catan? A huge game on here. That would be missing, but that's just a start. I mean, there's a ton of games that they can get. But, like I said, they do have some really good games on here. I just think that they're not going after the main board game demographic, of course. So, the library is going to depend on what you want. The Last GameBoard is going to have more board gamer type of board games on there. And that's the demographic that they're going on. And this one is going to have, hopefully, a little bit of everything. Obviously, that's what they've been doing for a while now. It's a little bit of everything. Sometimes they'll release arcade games that are more for kids or families. Sometimes we'll get a board game app like Risk that came out, late last year, Ticket to Ride and Pandemic, but they're far and few between as of right now. So we'll have to see how that progresses. So judge the library on what's currently available, and we'll see what happens here in the future, and I'll keep you guys updated. But it depends on what you're looking for the library. But just to give you guys some examples on some of these games and how they run, on the 32-inch version, let's say, for example, I bring up Monopoly on here. So here's Monopoly, for example. As I talked about before, this is what happens with some of the board games. These are players' seats right here, which is great. Everyone's sitting around the table. But because the game is square, it's not taking up the full real estate of the fact because this is a 16 by 9 screen. However, this size is great. I think the board looks fantastic on here, and it looks really good. And then, of course, you roll the digital dice and stuff like that and go around the Monopoly and play the game of Monopoly. And then you kind of just roll over here. You see your piece move and stuff like that. So that's an example here. You could buy the card or auction it off. I bought the card for 200, and then of course the next person would go. Here we have something like Ticket to Ride, for example. So again, the board's in the middle, just like I talked about before. But this one feels a lot better because you've got the cards over there on the side. So everything kind of takes up its space the way it's supposed to. You got the player things over there. Everyone can select, the 2 cards that they're supposed to and stuff like that going around the table. So this one also works really well. So they got some pretty good games on here. They just need more type board games for me to kind of, get into this even more. So again, with these libraries here, it just depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for board game games, like for a board gamer, I would say the Last GameBoard is probably going to hold you over more. Even though they have a lot less games, they do seem to be coming out with a game, at least a couple of games a month at least, and that should ramp up a lot if they expect to hit over 100 by the end of the year like they're saying. Or you have over 100 games available already here on the Infinity Game Table, but you're going to have to scroll through and see, hey, are these the games that me and my family want to play? If you're into the Hasbro type games, if you're into, what's on here, then obviously this is going to suit you really well. It's just going to be a judgment call for you. I mean, for me, I like having both options. I did grow up with the classics. I do know about Hasbro, and I do remember Candyland and stuff like that. But if I have my friends over and we want to play board games, I'm not going to bring out Candyland. I'm going to bring out, my Last GameBoard and play those type of board games. Sometimes I do bring this out for other games, like I've talked about, like sometimes Pandemic or Risk or stuff like that, or Ticket to Ride, or even some of their other games like Pixel Push Football, which I've talked about, which is fantastic. Things like that. Forzy. Sometimes I bring out games for that, but overall, I would say the Last GameBoard is more my style because obviously you guys can see here that, I own a ton of board games, and these are obviously board gamer type board games, and these are the kind of board games that I want the Infinity Game Table to get. But we'll see. Like I said, they're going after 2 different paths and 2 different avenues for families, and we'll see where they kind of lead. I'm glad that we have both of these on the market to kind of give us both options. So here's a quick demonstration of the Last GameBoard. This is the 18.5-inch version, so you guys have an idea of how this looks like. So Monopoly is obviously much smaller on here, but to my surprise, when I've been reviewing and talking about the Last GameBoard, the smaller version here, it actually works pretty well. Yes, obviously I'd prefer the 32-inch version if I have, 6 people playing this game, because it's easier to gather around a 32-inch table than a table of this size. But for, 2, 3, 4 people, this is a fantastic version, and you can read everything really well. The screen looks really good, and everything on here, looks as you would expect. I would say the same thing about Ticket to Ride. This is the Ticket to Ride on the 18.5-inch version, and again, yes, everything is a lot smaller, but it's perfectly legible and readable, as you guys can see the cards down there, to my surprise, and it works pretty well. Again, do I want a bigger version, like on the 32-inch, if I have a bunch of people over playing it? Yeah, sure, of course, the 32-inch version is better, but just because everything is bigger. But this being more portable, I love bringing this to my family's house. But if I was home and we had this out and people were over my house, of course, I'll bring the 32 version out. But if I'm going to a family or friend's house, this is a perfectly playable game on there, and it looks really good on here, and works a lot better than I ever thought it would with 5 people, playing on here. The next thing we're going to talk about here really quickly is local play. And what I mean by local play is, of course, not online. I'm talking about people surrounding the table and going around the table. Kind of what we talked about a little bit with those games I just showed off there in the overview. On the Last GameBoard, it's all about player drawers. So this is my player drawer sitting right here, as you guys can see here at the bottom. And you can choose your own color, all that stuff. You have, you can choose all that. And this is how it knows where someone is sitting. So right here, someone is sitting there. If I go right here, this is where the other person is sitting. This. If I want to create another player drawer on the table, I kind of just go like this, double tap, boom, it pops up. I can hit guest profile, or I can scan with a QR code, which we'll talk about in a minute, and boom, I got 3 players in the game on the actual game board. And now anytime I start a game, it knows that there was 3 players in the game that are ready to play any game on the game board. That's how they do things. It's all about player drawers and stuff like that. And what makes this fun, in my opinion, is what I really like about the Last GameBoard that the Infinity Game Table does not have, and I think, in my opinion, they need to have, and we've been talking about it since that thing came out, is that there's some board games that obviously have hidden information. You guys just saw Ticket to Ride. Of course, when you're picking those cards that I showed you guys, you're going to need to hide that information. Of course, you can go around the table and just hide the cards like this until you pick the 2 that you want, and then, click OK. But sometimes that stuff is a little bit annoying and stuff like that. It depends on how it's done. Now, here on the Last GameBoard, they actually do it in 2 different ways, and 2 interesting ways. So all of their games have both of these options now when you play them. Let's take, for example, a game like Texas Hold'em, which is obviously very reliant on hidden information. and let's say that I wanted to do a $2,000 buy-in, and let's say I wanted to ready up all these players here because all of them are going to play. Oh, actually, can't. This is a game that, like as it says there, you can't activate two on the same board because this is a 4-player game. So of course everyone needs to be on a corner. So ignore that one. We'll just play with 2 for the time being, and we'll hit deal. So you can see these 2 players are sitting right here. And what's cool is, as you can see here, it's telling you can just put your hand just like this. So I can see my cards just like this, and it works with the technology that they have built into the Last GameBoard, which is really cool. And this is the possibility of things that you can do. One of the big marquee features of the Last GameBoard that sets it apart from iPads or the Infinity Game Table is that they have unlimited touch. So obviously when you have an iPad, it's limited to your 10 fingers because everyone has 10 fingers on their hand. There's no reason to have any more. But with the Last GameBoard like this, when you're talking about playing with a lot of people, and game pieces that we'll talk about later, obviously you're going to have a lot of hands touching different things, and it's cool to be able to do stuff like this that you can just, hey, look at the cards anytime I want, and that's how they do hidden information. Unfortunately, the Last GameBoard that's something that they don't really do with hidden information like that. You can't put your hand in front of it and it just kind of hide and auto hide and do it by itself. That's a Last GameBoard feature. Their unlimited touch allows that, which is really cool. Their touchscreen thing that they have going on, and I think that's really cool. And again, on the Infinity Game Table, your only option is essentially to get these privacy screens that are either made out of cardboard or get your own, which I'll show off after I finish talking about here on the Last GameBoard. But it is really cool that you get to do that. But there is another option that they also do as well, and I talked about in my videos before, and that's that on the Last GameBoard, you can also just use a regular companion app. So if you have an iPhone, or if you have an iPad or an Android phone, you just download their app, and then the hidden cards will actually show up on your phone. I don't have a phone here right now to actually be able to show you, unfortunately, because I'm using it to record these videos. But essentially, and I've shown this off on other videos if you guys want to see it, but essentially, instead of logging into a guest account like you saw me here do, where you log into a guest account here, you would scan this QR code so it logs you in through the phone, and then basically on your phone you have your player profile, and then when you start up a game and you play, those cards and whatever game you're actually playing would actually go on your phone. And any of the games that have these little purple icons right there are the ones that support using a companion app. So things like Night of the Ninja and Koi and Creature Feature all support that, so you can use a companion app. Same thing with Anagramma. So your letters that you have in front of you, instead of having to do that, where it is a cool option to have if you don't have a phone, you have the option to using a phone as well. My personal preference, I love using a phone because everyone has that hidden information a lot easier. You don't have to worry about putting your hand and everyone hiding their things on the board. I just rather have the companion app and kind of lay back and play it that way. But it is great to have both options for people who don't have phones. Now here is an example. Of course, I'm playing with a computer in spades, so it really doesn't matter. But on the Infinity Game Table, again, they come with these cardboard pieces. This is the game board, the smaller version, but the big one comes with these cardboard pieces as well, obviously a bigger version of them. Or you can buy Etsy pieces that people have made to do this, but essentially what you would have to do is essentially put this cardboard just like this around the table so nobody can see your cards, and then kind of play these cards just like that. Of course, on the smaller table, it becomes a little bit more annoying to use these. It is possible. But it definitely becomes more annoying than, like, for example, the one downstairs on the 32-inch version, where obviously you have more room to do this. But I do wish that they would finally give us an Arcade1up app. Maybe with the new Arcade1up app that they came out with, they'll finally add integration with the Infinity Game Board here and the Infinity Game Table, where you can just see these cards and see all these things on an app instead of having to rely on these blockers here. Have these blockers as an option is fantastic. Options are great. But I want it on a companion app so we don't have to worry about, sometimes, having this in the way when you're trying to play certain games. Now, both of these systems, the Infinity Game Table and the Infinity Game Board, of course, have online play, just like the Last GameBoard does. I would say that the Infinity Game Board and their platform and the Infinity Game Table definitely have more games on it that actually have online play enabled. So you actually have this thing sorted right here. So it's called Connected Play. So you can kind of just sort all the games that have online play that I have downloaded. Or if I go to the game store, for example, and I wanted to sort by games that are online on the game store, boom, there they are. So you can see they have Battleship, Candyland, Checkers, Chess, Chutes and Ladders, Clue, Connect Four, Dominoes, Game of Life, Guess Who, Wizards, Chess, Monopoly, Scrabble, Sorry, Trouble, and Yahtzee. As games that actually have online play. So these are the ones that have online play. You can actually play with other people who own the Infinity Game Table. So it's not a huge selection. They sometimes add them to other games as they come out, but there are some games that you can play online, which is great. Of course, they also have games that have AI, just like the Last GameBoard does, or they have games that you can play, of course, locally around the table. And like I talked about here on the last game board, it's the exact same idea. Some of these games do have online, but majority of them right now do not. But they are adding them and going back and adding them into games that make sense. For example, today actually, right when I made this video, Zombie Dice got an option where you can now play Zombie Dice online. So that's fantastic with other people who own the game board. That's really cool. Sometimes when the game is ported over from the Steam platform and stuff like that, you make like some of their games are not completely built from the ground up. For example, Mystic Vale. Mystic Vale has online play with actual crossplay with Steam, which is interesting. Just because the Mystic Vale game is already on Steam and it was ported over to this platform, so they use the online infrastructure, and we have possibilities of playing with other players who are on Steam. So you get that possibility as well. Again, majority of these games do not have online play yet, but it is something that they keep adding to games that make sense. So I look forward to how that's expanding. But again, most of these games right now, it's all about local play or AI play, which I think is fantastic because that's what I use these game tables for. But I do realize that obviously we want to be able to play some of these games online as the pool of players gets bigger and more people get the last game boards or the Arcade1up Infinity Game Table. We want to see more and more games online. So it is good that they're going back and adding some online capabilities to some of the games. Wings of Glory is another one that has online. Zombie Dice, like I just talked about, got that just added today, which is fantastic. And then, a couple of other ones that have online is Chess, for example, and Mystic Vale. But again, they're still going back and adding online play, but I can't wait to see them continuing to do that. But I would say, obviously, there's more games on the Infinity Game Table currently that have online play. But also, their game library is bigger, so that shouldn't be a shock. I want to just talk a little bit about the OS on these systems because they're obviously very different. You guys have seen that throughout the video, but just really quickly just to talk about it. Here on the last game board, I would say that this is an ever-evolving OS because they're always, every couple of weeks, we always get a new OS update. So they definitely update a lot more frequently because they have a lot of plans for this thing compared to the Infinity Game Table, where they finally just updated and gave us that brand new dashboard here in the last month or so, which is fantastic. But they definitely don't update and add new features to the OS as frequently as what the last game board is trying to do. And they've had a lot of plans going forward. We'll have to see how that evolves. But I'll tell you guys what's here right now. Of course, we talked about the main component is these player drawers and how that works before. That's a main component of how all their OS functions and how their games function and how they want you to do things on here. But of course, you have the play section there on top. So of course, and this OS is brand new too. They added a bunch of new features like being able to go to the installed section. So these are the games that I actually have installed, as you guys can see there. But I can also go to the library, which is essentially their store. And these are all the games that are in their store here, as you guys can see here. And you can sort these by alphabetical order up here. You can also do it by playtime if you want. And you can also do it by player count if you want as well. So if you want to see the 4-player games and stuff like that. They do have a couple of improvements that I would like to see them make. Like I said, this is a much better improvement than how it was even a couple of weeks ago with their new OS version. Much, much better. But I would like to see them do where, if I want to see the 4-player games like I talked about before, what I really want to see is I want to see all the games that are 4 players. Not just sort the whole entire library in that fashion like it's doing right now. I want to see all the 4-player games. And like if I hit 4, I want this to drop down and say, hey, show me all the 6-player games. Hey, show me all the 5-player games, et cetera, et cetera. That'd be much more useful than how they're doing it now. But either way, they're updating all the time. They're listening to feedback, so it's great. And again, their tiles for games, I think, are great because they have unique features and stuff like that here. You can see the Board Game Geek rating for some of the games, which is great when they do that. They also have ratings that you rate when you go into here and kind of rate the games yourself. They have descriptions for everything, the features that it supports, how many players it supports, how long they expect the game to take, and then players also like, and then they have other games kind of relying on here. They have some screenshots of the game, as you guys can see through there. So I do like the way that their store is kind of organized there. I do like the icons that they show in the game that give you a quick glance on what they do. The yellow one is game pieces, which we haven't talked about yet. And then this is the companion app like I talked about before. If you go to the library section, you'll also see sometimes when a game has an update. This is a game I don't have downloaded, so you'd see the cloud icon. But if a game has an update, you'll see an update icon as well. Unfortunately, none of them have updates because I updated them all before this video. But that's how they do things. Then they got the settings icon here where you can go in here and uninstall things. You got your network to connect to Wi-Fi, date and time, languages, account, and then you can update when there's a new available update there. So that's how they do that. There's a tutorial right here, so you can always run through the tutorial again if you forget how to use it, and it talks about the player drawers and how things work and stuff like that and how to open them, so you guys can run through that if you want to. So we can exit that. And then over here it has a player profile, which is mine, and achievements. This thing is all about getting achievements and unlocking them. They're not active yet, Again, this thing just came out of beta a couple weeks ago, so all the achievements are ready to go, but they're not starting to populate yet. But there's things like, playing games for 4 hours or playing a bunch of different games, winning a bunch of games, all that kind of stuff that they're tracking and you unlocking achievements for. So I can't wait for that to be active and kind of go for these achievements and stuff. But again, they have a lot of future plans with this thing. They plan to add, online play for more of their games. They plan to add like a gather section eventually that they talked about a long time ago, that basically when you hit it, you'll see, maybe all the active games that are online, so you know exactly who's online. Essentially an open lobby, which is what all of us want. Like, instead of me right now saying, hey, I want to play a game online, but I don't know if there's anybody online in Mystic Vale, for example. But if you had a tab here that somehow linked all of these games together, that was the gather section, and you click on it and it just shows you an open lobby of all games. Like, hey, there's 2 players playing Mystic Vale, there's 5 players playing Open Card Wonder, and they're waiting for, another player to play, stuff like that. That's what they're touting to do in the future, and I can't wait to see how this OS evolves in the future, and they're always updating it, so it's always improving, and we'll see what the future holds for this one. I'm definitely excited more for the OS updates on here than what is on the Infinity Game Board and Game Table. Now, the Infinity Game Table actually got a giant update with the interface. You guys can go back to my previous videos to see the old interface, but the interface here is much, much better. As you guys have been seeing throughout the whole video, you can now see what you actually own by clicking on the My Games tab. That was not a thing before. You can see only what you own now. You can not only see what you own, but you can categorize it by online play, computer, AI opponent, which is awesome to see what games have AI, what games are 1 player, so you can see only 1-player games, what games are 2 players. So that is what I really, really like that the Last GameBoard doesn't have, that I was talking about before. I want to be able to just click on 1 player and show me all my 1-player games. And then if I want to see all 5+ player games, show me all of those. And that's what this is doing, that the Last GameBoard needs to do, as opposed to just organizing the whole library in that fashion, because that's not as useful. Like the fact that it has last played here, featured games. You can even have a favorites tab here if you want to add games to your favorites as their library gets bigger. You have the game store sitting right here, which is nice, and you can come in here and obviously there's a little ad that they showcase their new games coming, which I really like. Their featured games are sitting right here, and then everything is categorized. You have the news section up here, and then over here you have just like the sports categories, table games, all this kind of stuff, and I have computer opponent selected. That's why things weren't showing up. But you can see all the new stuff, action, application, arcade, board games, stuff like that, card games. Everything is kind of categorized the way it should, which I really like. The only thing that's a little bit, like I said, it's not as smooth as what the Last GameBoard is when maneuvering around the actual interface. There's a little bit of like delay that doesn't make it as smooth, but it does work well enough, and the games all run really, really well on it, even better than the 32-inch, which we talked about before. You can go in here. In the interface here, you can even change your avatar and stuff like that when people see you online, which is nice. You can select the background, so it's not just that gray background, which is nice. That's your email. You have a friends list. You can actually invite people to your actual to a game online, which even though the Last GameBoard has online play, like I talked about, there's no friends list of any kind. So this is a step up of that. So you can actually have a friends list and play with some people online, which is nice. And this is just for redemption codes. So I do like the interface on here, especially to what it used to be before. I have no complaints. I like the fact I don't need both interfaces to be the same, so I like having, what one company thinks is good versus another, and they both have their pluses and minuses like we just talked about. So I think they both have their strengths and both have their weaknesses. I do want to take a minute here to talk about some of the unique features of the Last GameBoard here real quick. So obviously on the Infinity Game Table, you kind of get what you get. We just talked about all the features it has, online play, sitting around the table playing those games. We showed all that off. And that's kind of what this is too. Obviously they have different games and stuff like that, but what sets this one apart is that infinite touch that we talked about there in the middle of the video, where this doesn't require just 10 fingers like the Last Game or like the Infinity Game Table does, or an iPad or stuff like that. That's what sets it apart. And the reason that they did that is for a couple of reasons. It's because they have D&D apps on here, and granted, I don't use these, and I know that they're still being worked on. They don't run perfectly, from what I heard. At least a couple of them don't, but again, I don't use them, so I can't really comment on them. I don't even have them downloaded because I don't have friends that play D&D, and I don't really know how to play D&D except for the videos that I've watched. But you can see they have like Foundry and stuff like that, and Encounter++, stuff like that. And what you can do in games like that is you can actually have they come with the game board comes with a bunch of these pieces, about 10 of them, and you can actually use your own minis on the board, so you can actually play with physical pieces while on a digital board. Essentially what happens is you put your mini into this base. These are regular sized bases, and it has like these conductors here on the bottom that when you place the piece here on the thing, it actually knows where your piece is, and then you can move it around the board, and it can do all of these sorts of things with VTTs and D&D applications, like, you know, line of sight and all that stuff. So it knows exactly where the piece is. That's all really, really cool tech. And some of the stuff that they just came out with recently, it's not just these pieces that you can use with D&D. You can also use these with the chess application as well. So if you want to use a chess piece in there. But then they also come out with these smaller pawn pieces, as you can see here. And the only one right now that actually works with it really well is Stop Thief. So Stop Thief, you can use these small pieces here. These are like little pawn pieces, as you can see here. And what's really interesting is that they sync really fast too. And you guys will see that here in a minute. And you can see how fast that actually synced. And now I can actually move my piece, as you guys are looking at here. You can actually move your piece across the board just like this. As you can see, moving across the board, which is really cool, and how fast that just synced. And you can actually just use this piece, physical pieces, while in the game. That'll be even more interesting, of course, when they keep adding it to more games, and you can use these player pieces, you know, for even more games. But they're definitely bringing that physical aspect into digital gaming. I can't wait till they have like maybe real dice that you'll actually roll, and then it appears to be used in the game, you know, stuff like that. And this is just the start of kind of what their goal is and what their vision was from the start. So I'm excited to see how that kind of pans out in the future. But again, that's definitely the differences. You know, a really cool and unique feature of the Last GameBoard. Not only that hand blade thing that I showed you to hide hidden information that the Infinity Game Table doesn't have, but also the fact that it's unlimited touch and you can use, you know, pieces and stuff like this, and you know, pawns and stuff like this or minis for, you know, your D&D apps and chess and some other games as well. And we'll see what other games get it in the future that I think is really cool. Alright guys, so that is the conclusion of all the comparisons that I have. So I want to give you guys my final thoughts on all of these three. The Infinity Game Board, the Infinity Game Table, and of course the Last GameBoard. So for me, if I were to only have one of these devices and I would have bet on the future, I'd probably pick the Last GameBoard. Only because they seem to be going after games that I really, really like, and they seem to have the most potential between the, you know, the unique features that we talked about with the hand blade gesture to hide information if you don't want to use a companion app, but the fact that it does have a companion app already to be able to use with the games, and it works really well in my experience. You know, using the companion app and hiding information that way with your phones and stuff like that is exactly what I want. Has obviously board gamer type games, games that we all know from the board game market, and that's the crowd that they're going after. So you're going to see more of that. You're not going to see, you know, random arcade games or stuff like that, you know, as the games that are coming out on that thing. So it's fantastic to, you know, see that. And then they have OS updates all the time, and, you know, they have a lot of ambitious plans for the future of you know, social play and playing online and stuff. So I'm excited for the future of this thing. And if there was only one I was going to pick, that would be the one, in my personal opinion, I'd pick, because of all the things I just said, and because I'm a board gamer first. However, of course, the Infinity Game Table is a lot more accessible and is actually, you know, basically fully featured already. You're not going to have to worry like, hey, you know, with the Last GameBoard, it's kind of at the starting line. They only have like 20 or 25 games on there. They have a long way to go. Some of the features, you know, there's a lot of features they're still working on and stuff like that. So it's a give or take. It's what you want to kind of bank on. The games that are on the Last GameBoard are great, but there's not that many of them. The Infinity Game Table, you know, has options for you already, and is an existing product in the market that's been there for a while, being sold at Best Buy and everything. And, you know, it has a lot of recognizable games for people. And even the games that we don't recognize, there's some really good ones on there that I've talked about in my top 20 games on the Infinity Game Table. And you have the option of getting a 32-inch, which is my preferred one, or the smaller one. And if you want to be crazy like me, and sometimes you have both, then, you know, 32 inches is here when I have a lot of people over and they're at my house, because it has the legs and it makes it easier to play, you know, games that require 5 or 6 players or more. Or if I want to bring it to my family's house and we're playing a 4-player game, or a game that doesn't require all of us to be on the table, or those 2-player fun games, the touchscreen on that is more responsive than the 32-inch version like we talked about in my review of it, then it's great to have an 18.5-inch portable one that I can bring anywhere I go. And a lot easier and a lot less heavy. I would never bring that 32-inch anywhere else. It's going to stay right where it is, because it was just too much of a hassle always. So, and like I said, they're supposed to be bringing more board games to the table. We'll have to see what they do in the future. They have some, but with that big Asmodee license, I want to see more. I want to see more from them. Catan is obviously the most obvious one that I would love to see on here and see how that gets implemented, and that'd be a great one to play on here. Catan's really popular and is owned by Asmodee. So I can't wait to see what they bring on here, but they have over 100 games already, and there's a lot more family-friendly games on here that aren't like, the hardcore board gamers. If you're just a family with kids and stuff like that, then obviously the Infinity Game Table, if you look at their library, might fit more your style because they'll recognize a lot of these games, and they're more regular games that you'll find at Target and stuff like that. I hope that the Infinity Game Table kind of does gravitate towards both sides. Hey, cater to the hardcore board gamers, bring some of those games on here, and cater to the other side, so we're both happy with the table. And hopefully it's successful that they keep continuing. They just released a small version, so I hope that they keep releasing more games for it, and we'll see how that goes. But I'm excited for the future of both of these, to be honest, but that's just me because I'm a big person who loves board games, and I'm a big person who loves technology, and I just think these things are fun. My main use case for this is, I have a bunch of board games in front of me. You guys saw my collection, but nothing. It's awesome to be able to, when I brought these to my family's house, I brought the smaller portable 18.5 inch, and I have 100 games with me, over 100 games to be able to play with my family instantly on its screen. Or the Last GameBoard, I had 25 different games and real board games that are known by the board game community that I could play with my family at any time and just bring that thing over anywhere I go. So, I have a lot of board games, and, we'll play most of my board games when we're here, but bringing those to family and friends' houses and playing them when people are here, when I have parties, just to have these tablet screens out so people could just use them and have fun, is awesome, and it's easy to play, easy to gravitate towards, and just kind of pick these up and play. So I think everything has its place, at least in my house it does, but I love all of these type of devices, and I talked a lot about why I think these devices are cool. It's obviously not going to be for everyone, and one of the things that I forgot to mention before we wrap this video up that I can't believe I almost forgot to mention throughout that whole entire overview is the prices of the games. So the Infinity Game Table comes with over 50 games right off the bat, so a nice gigantic selection for you. And then everything else is a la carte. It could be anywhere from 99 cents all the way up to like $12.99, I think is the highest price I've seen for a game so far. So that's how their store is run. And then on the Last GameBoard, as of right now, you get a year subscription, or a year for free. You can see that on their website. They're giving a year of games for free while they get more games on there. Because essentially what they want to do is they want to give everyone two options. One, buy the games a la carte. You want this game? $5. You want this game? $8. Obviously, that's an option for everyone. But what they also want to do is have it a subscription base, like a Netflix for board gamers on this device, where you pay a set subscription, let's say $9.99 or $14.99, whatever they go with, and you have access to the whole entire catalog, and that's how they do it as well. Now, obviously, they're giving everyone a year for free right now because obviously they only have 20 to 25 games right now, like you guys saw. So of course they can't do a subscription base right now because no one's going to pay $10 or $15 a month for 20 or 25 games. So they need to get that catalog up a lot and make these games really, really solid. So that's why they were saying, over 100 games by the end of the year. I think if they hit that goal and they have 100 games and they're launching, one or two marquee games a month at least, or one every couple of weeks and stuff after they release that initial 100, I think they'll be in a really, really good spot. And people will, subscribe if they want to, or pay a la carte if they want to. It's great to have both options, and give people that flexibility on how they want to own these games. So, but they're very different in how they run their stores compared to the Infinity Game Table and the Last GameBoard. So that's something to keep in mind. But those are my thoughts on both of these. I'm excited for the future of all of these devices in general. But if I only had to pick one, if money only allowed one, as a person who loves board games and excited about the future of it and everything that they're promising and stuff, obviously I would bank on the Last GameBoard. But the Infinity Game Table has a solid foundation already and a lot of different games for you to enjoy. So give or take what you want. So that's it, guys. If you guys have any questions about anything we talked about in today's video, as always, leave it down below. If not, thank you guys for watching. Until next time.